So we'll now move to the next panel discussion number 2 on creating enabling legal environment for inclusion of persons with psychosocial disabilities in communities. We'll request the chair, Stephen Allen, and the panelists, Ms. Kriti Sharma from Human Rights Watch, Karuna Parajuli from ICJ, Ms. Hanbyul Choi from the Korean Disability Forum, Dr. Samuel Kabwe from the CRPD Committee, and Ms. Dorothy Gold from Liberation UK.
So I was going to start this by saying good morning, but I think we're in the afternoon now. So I'm going to say good afternoon, and it's quite a hard thing to follow what an incredible declaration we have just had. Congratulations to TCI and to TCI Women on establishing this crucial new platform. It just goes to show the vibrancy of the movement that is in this room and that you are all bringing to your work in communities around the world. And it's an incredible privilege to be invited to join you here today. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Stephen Allen. I'm the executive director of an organization called the Validity Foundation. And we're a specialist legal advocacy organization dedicated to using strategic litigation to promote the human rights of persons with psychosocial disabilities and persons with intellectual disabilities in both Europe and Africa. I'm also extremely proud to say that Validity has, for the last, I think, 2.5 to 3 years, been an associate member of TCI, because we support your mission and we want to make ourselves, as far as possible, useful to your mission, including through providing legal advocacy support. So I do invite all of you to come and speak to me and see how we can help you. In this panel, we're talking about creating enabling legal environments to promote the inclusion of persons with psychosocial disabilities. And you're going to hear a little more from me because we have incredible speakers on this panel bringing an excellent diversity of experiences. Firstly, we'll take the first 3 speakers, and then we're going to take a short break to hear questions and answers from everyone so that you get an opportunity to engage. And then the final 2 speakers, followed by another short round. I've been told that people are hungry, so I have to finish by, I think 1:45, right? So we'll make sure we do that. What is the time now? It's a good question. It's 12, so we've got an hour, so we will endeavor to respect your time. So in the first panel of 3, we're going to hear firstly from Kriti Sharma from the Human Rights Watch. And I understand, Kriti, you will be sharing us findings, including of your monitoring of institutions. And we want to know from you in particular, what recommendations do you have for our strategies? And what commitments can Human Rights Watch make to the wonderful people that we have in this room and the TCI network? So Kriti, I'm going to hand over to you first. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. And yeah, I want to just start by thanking TCI for having put together such an incredible event, and congratulations to TCI Women. Such a historic moment to be a part of. It's great to be on this panel with so many distinguished speakers, and I'm so glad this is the topic we're talking about, because it is something that I think, when we look at looking at institutions, especially looking at the work on DI, and that everyone has spoken about this morning, creating an enabling environment is what so many of you in the room are doing. And I think this is the strength that, when we all come together on these issues, we can really turn the tide. So just in terms of what, we do at Human Rights Watch, over the last 2 decades, working on deinstitutionalization has been one of our key priority areas and the pillar of our work. We've looked at this issue in about 15 countries around the world, from Japan and India, Indonesia, to Ghana, Nigeria, Croatia, Serbia, Russia even, Brazil. And it's something that we've worked on nationally with, we're working in very close collaboration with organizations of persons with disabilities. Currently, we're working on Kenya and the UK. And this forms really a core bread and butter issue for us. Of course, as you can all imagine, the findings across countries are very similar. In fact, you could virtually copy and paste the report, just changing the name of the country. That's how similar they are. And I think, part of what we know is the conditions in these institutions are incredibly abusive. The physical conditions, the violence that people experience, both physical and sexual. But for us, the focus has really been looking at coercion and bringing that out, because in the public narrative, there is still this idea that whether it's psychiatric hospitals or residential care institutions, that they can be a location that is seen as therapeutic for the general public. And for us, our focus has really been to change the narrative. Language in this case matters. So we have been very intentional in using words like arbitrary detention, as opposed to involuntary hospitalization, which is often used, and really focusing on, practices around forced treatment, around restraints, around electroshock therapy, and really narrowing in on making this, demonstrating how these are actually abuses, and not something that is seen as therapeutic. When we started this work almost 2 decades ago, the gap really we found was looking at institutions where people with psychosocial disabilities are detained. There was a lot more research on institutions where people with intellectual disabilities were locked up. There was a lot of conversation around nursing homes, but on psychiatric facilities, there wasn't as much information and testimony of people with lived experience coming out into the media, into the public domain. And one of the primary reasons for this was access. It was very hard for OPD partners to always get access or to be able to go to institutions across the country and really uncover that abuse. So that's where we really found partners coming to us and saying that this is where Human Rights Watch can add value, and if you could come in and look at this issue, produce a report that would be a tool for our advocacy, and that's what we've been trying to do over the last many years. We've really been led by what OPDs want us to do, and how they feel we can support and complement their work. And access, as I mentioned, was part of this, but it's also on how we choose to work on these issues. So I'll give you a very concrete example from our work in Indonesia with Yeni and the Indonesian Mental Health Association. Hey, Yeni. And when I started working on Indonesia in 2013, we were looking particularly at how people with psychosocial disabilities were chained or shackled. And it was an issue that was, it was 57,000 people who had been shackled at least once in their lives in Indonesia at that point. And I remember my first meeting with Yeni, and she said, that's not good enough. You need to look at the whole system. And she said, you need to look at every single type of institution, whether it is your local faith-based institution, whether it is a mosque, or it could be a private or government institution, as well as psychiatric hospitals. And I said, wait a minute, like that's a lot, how are we going to do that, especially across Indonesia, which is such a massive country. And then we did it. And, that was really, I think, an example of being led by organizations on the ground that really saw what was needed to change the narrative. We also took a very, very mainstream approach, again led by Yenny, in terms of having interministerial focus. So it wasn't just about speaking to the Health Ministry or the Ministry of Social Affairs, but it was involving the Law Ministry, the Home Affairs Ministry, working with faith organizations to really change mindsets and hearts and minds and tackle stigma. And initially, when we published the report, we did a first campaign focused on community services. So, what are the options for support in the community? Our second campaign was on deinstitutionalization. So, we first prepped the ground on, making this issue accessible. It wasn't an issue that was always easy for the layperson to understand. And then secondly, we went into a DI focus. And I'm happy to say, for us, the idea was to support, local groups in what they were doing. When we first launched, we'd had a public press conference in English. We had, published the report. There was a lot that was, led by Human Rights Watch. And in the second round, we really took a back seat. I remember, Yenny spoke at a press conference in the Indonesian parliament. The whole event was in Bahasa Indonesia. I didn't speak actually at all. It was a very conscious idea that this is really led by OPDs, and it's not our role to kind of be the front or front facing. It's really to be led by what OPDs want on the ground. And I have to say this is a testament to what OPDs in Indonesia have been able to do, because just last year Yenny's organization led a constitutional court challenge on guardianship. And this is one of the ways that they've been really tackling and breaking down every part of DI. For example, on guardianship, it's who can actually put you in an institution, right? And if you attack that as a building block, then it really reduces the number of a number of people that can be locked up. And the amicus brief, we submitted an amicus brief like Validity did and others did, and it was incredible to see that even though the guardianship clause was not completely abolished, it was partially abolished, which meant that it made it much harder for people to actually take relatives to institutions. So this is just one of the examples of how we can tackle and create an enabling environment for inclusion that breaks down some of these the issues around institutionalization. A second example I want to share is from our work in Australia. We worked in Australia. We started work looking really at access to justice, and it was a big issue, particularly for First Nations people or indigenous communities, and people who have, indigenous people who have disabilities. They were getting overrepresented in the prison system because there was a lack of social support in the community. And so prison became the last safety net. And when we went in, we were really looking at the issue very broadly. And our OPD partners said, that's something that we are able to do very well. What we really need you to do is go into prisons, because we don't have access, and Human Rights Watch could probably get access. So we completely pivoted the project, and we investigated 14 prisons across 3 Australian states. And we found that people with disabilities were bullied, targeted, they were at risk of physical and sexual violence. But I think the most important finding was that they were overrepresented in solitary confinement units. So they were perpetually locked up in solitary confinement, and it was never seen as solitary. It was always seen as someone is being put in observation, someone is being put isolated for, quote unquote, their own safety. And so for us, it was really important to feed into this issue, because it's not a traditional institutions issue, that many of us work on, but it is important for us to also feed into mainstream issues from a disability rights angle, where people with disabilities, and particularly in this case, psychosocial disabilities, are massively impacted. And so that's something that we really focused on in our Australia work. We convened an intersectional coalition because this was an issue that a lot of OPDs were not really working on. So we brought together not just OPDs, but also prison groups, prison unions, which was surprisingly supportive of this, indigenous rights organizations, and organizations of legal aid, and really across the board to campaign on solitary confinement. So okay, I'm gonna try and make it quick. So this is just two examples of the way we do this work and the way we want to be led by what OPDs think is important on this issue. I think just to wrap up, in terms of the way forward, we'd love to hear from you, guided by you on the direction that you think is important on DI. Where do you feel that the stakeholders on this panel, including Human Rights Watch, can add value and support the work that you're doing? I think, just to say from our approach, on DI, the international standards are there. The CRP guidelines are there. And our focus, for the next few years is really how to operationalize this, how to make it practical. What does this look like in practice? Echoing what Richa shared, how do we really change this on the ground? And I think for us, one of the core ways of doing this has been good practice work. So, this has come as a demand from a lot of our partners and, also from government, that if we don't have institutions, what else do we have? And it sounds like a very poor excuse, right? There's so much better and so much out there. But concretely, it has become a challenge because people don't, when they set out to conduct reforms, when they set out to build services, government especially, they really don't know, and they're doing it so badly because they don't know what it should look like. So what we have started doing, like many in this room, is really collating data, evidence on this, documenting good practices to demonstrate that it's possible and it's possible at scale. And so we've done this in places like Lille, France, in Brussels, Belgium, crisis support in Canada. A lot of our work in developing countries as well has included this component. And I would say there are three main points that I think we as a movement need to bring out. One is putting together that data and evidence base, because that is what is irrefutable. Governments always push back on, on human rights. They think it's too ideal. Can this really exist? But if we have hard data and evidence, it makes it much harder to push back. Secondly, we need to show scale. I don't think it's, it's been more than 10 years now since the CRPD came into effect. It's not enough to just show pockets of good practice or pilots. I think we really need to show it's scalable, we're able to do it at national levels. And thirdly, demonstrating how to do it. So, it's really important. I think it's not enough to just say it's possible and this exists, but what is your, 1, 2, 3 of how we do it? So if you think of it as a IKEA or, do-it-yourself kind of furniture that you put together. It comes with a leaflet, right? Step 1, 2, 3, 5. That's what we need, because I think that's what will make it practical and really change the game for governments. And so this is what we're trying to do with our partners, including in the UK with Dorothy. It's a very conservative political environment. There's no rhetoric on, the CRPD. The UK government is funding very progressive trainings in countries like Ghana and elsewhere. But domestically, it is shocking to see it's one of the worst countries on DI that I have personally ever documented. So it's, this is the way we're really approaching it, looking at the good practice model, trying to be as innovative as possible, creating, for example, potentially a 3D model of an institution so people understand how abusive those settings are, and really trying to focus on changing the narrative around coercion.
Amazing. Thank you so much. There's so much, I think, for us to build on from that. There was the narrative shift component. I think there was also the really crucial thing that you're demonstrating, which is that a mainstream human rights organization is taking its lead from organizations of persons with disabilities and utilizing its role, really, to strengthen evidence base, to develop those recommendations that can be scalable. So thank you so much for this first presentation. It's been really very interesting. I couldn't have been more on the UK. I'll leave that for Dorothy later. So at this point, we'll move to our second speaker. So I'm delighted to introduce Karuna Parajuli. I hope I said that right. Yeah, ish. From the International Commission of Jurists. And I understand you've been conducting some work on the right to legal capacity and access to justice, and you have a declaration to launch for us today. So straight over to you. Go for it. Yeah, straight onto the PowerPoint.
Hello everyone. So this is Karuna. So a petite-sized woman standing on the right side of the hall and wearing a glasses. So before I start with launching the declaration, I'd like to extend my tribute to Dr. Varvahi Davar, who was our point of contact in 2023 when we thought of doing a regional convening to discuss rights of persons with disability. And I think I interacted her once and in email 3 times. But she was such a strong woman, you know, like if we thought of having meeting with Bhargavi, we were all prepared because she was so focused and she knew what she wanted. So, I mean, I think it's tragedy that I didn't get to work much with her, but I can really see, you know, it's not about only a person only, but it's about mission, how TCI has grown. And today with this, you know, like, I mean, we are people, global, I mean, the ICA, TCI that started in Asia has grown up to have this global movement, and I really appreciate each of you for being part of this. And with that, before I move to launching this declaration, I think it's good, you know, like you're human and you make errors. So we are ICJ basically for Asia. We have worked for we have started working in late 2022. I mean, specifically focus on disability rights. Our colleagues in Africa have been working for a long time. So we're learning. So we want to learn with you all. So in terms of this declaration, there could be some, you know, like it might not be accessible to persons with different kinds of disabilities, and this is not audible. So we are trying to accommodate that too. Please, we are open for feedback and we want to learn from your side. Having said that, I'll also like to take this opportunity to go back to May 2024. Worker, I remember, you know, how much it takes Richard to do this kind of conference, and especially for person who has not worked in the disability environment, you want to make sure and you get so much cautious about everything that, but I really appreciate our organizers of that event. I see Matrika ji there from courses, really helpful, really supportive of, you know, saying this should be included. This is what persons with psychosocial disability and intellectual disability need is. And I would also like to thank TCI-Global in partnership, because, I mean, in terms of substantive work, it was really new in Asia, like our global colleagues. And I really like the way, you know, I want to remember our global ICJ global lead, Timothy Fist-Hodgson. Some of the colleagues might know him, and also co-lead Wilson Macharia, who is also a person with a visual impairment and a lawyer, who have been really supportive of this work. And within ICJ, you know, like there is kind of, you know, you push for an agenda and you continuously keep doing on it. And usually there are organizations that are very accommodative with working on civil and political rights, but within organization you need to fight. This is something you have to be included. So we are working on that, and ICJ, I'm really happy to share that ICJ is also building its disability inclusion policy, so which itself shows that ICJ wants to elaborate work and go into multiple areas of work. And also, I'd like to thank another organizer, Nepal Disabled Women Association. ICJ, as TCI keeps saying, you know, cross disability. I have started learning that word too. So cross disability work. So we wanted a partnership of courses, NDWA, TCI-Global. So this way we this conference, and with that, I think it's a launch. So we can see it. I'd like to, you know, request if you have just to raise it, you know, we usually do it in Nepal, that, and also to the panelists, there are copies on the table. If you could just, you know, raise it, and so it just That's how we do in Nepal, you know, like a culture of raising and showing that it's launched. Yeah, can we scroll a bit? If you see the cover page, I would also like to thank artist Rosmi Amatya, who is a person and activist who has hearing impairment. She really contributed in making that art. That was also a theme of our conference in 2024 May. So we basically focused our discussion on Article 12 and 13 of CRPD, and we discussed about legal capacity, deinstitutionalization, supportive decision making, and together with that we discussed like how intersectionality or the identities, including, you know, person who have disability due to armed conflict in Nepal. Often in the disability movement, these people are left out from discussion. So these people were also part of, you know, sharing what are the issues they have been raising. And you can see, if you go through the declaration, you can see we have raised systematic failure, how there are issues of, you know, there were, I mean, speakers have been talking about how still medical approach is taken, and we need to push for human rights approach, and stigma and widespread discrimination. And with that, I would also like to, you know, really appreciate how basically in Asian culture, we have joint family, and if someone has a depression or something, you know, psychosocial disability, people don't want to discuss about it, and you're organizing itself. You need the guts to do that. Hats off for that. I think we need to clap for what TCI is doing and how each member organization is doing. Walker, we need to clap for, because you get organized and you make people, I mean, you come out and see people, you get organized. And you know, in organization, you have a greater force. And I see, going back, you know, if you discuss in your family dinner, someone has depression, then people don't want to talk about it, and you're organizing it globally. So it's already a very commendable job. And with that, I would also like to put forward some of the commitment that ICJ could do and what we've been doing in terms of enhancing access to justice for persons with disability. First thing is, we are reviewing laws from different countries, five from Asia, 5 from Africa, and 5 from Latin America, to review civil and criminal laws that are discriminatory against persons with disability in terms of legal capacity. How some laws, like, you know, in many countries and including our country, COSIS has filed a writ petition challenging, like, for a contract, if you see a person, like, who are the person who cannot do the contract, then one number, minor, and then there would be someone with unsound mind. Like, what are they trying to imply that? So that are the thing we're reviewing and saying that this is not in compliance with CRPD and such laws should be struck out. And same goes with criminal responsibilities and other criminal laws in different countries. So we are working on this. And next thing is we also do submission, amicus brief, and third party submission if there are cases related to legal capacity and disability rights. And we are also working with judges, and you know, like, I mean, working with judges is tough and easy at the same time, because judges don't want to be trained. So what ICJ has been using is, you have a judicial dialogue with the judges. So that is in a way capacity building, but you have a dialogue so that they understand what are the international standards, what are international law. So in our 2024 May conference, we had also included a judicial dialogue, and I'm really happy to share with you, in Sri Lanka, recently Constitutional Council has appointed Justice Murdu Fernando as the Chief Justice of Supreme Court of Sri Lanka, and she was part of our judicial dialogue in May 2024, and she's really willing to work on disability rights issue and engage judiciary on that part. So I think having more judges who are aware about disability rights and CRPD itself is kind of thing that we need to celebrate. And if you see in the agenda today, Thai's judge Thanya Nustantikul will also be here joining us, and we'll be discussing how judiciary can accommodate the needs of persons with disabilities. And with that, ICC is also working with the judiciaries globally to formulate judicial rules, because, you know, like, we say, okay, we want reasonable accommodation, but often judges don't understand that, and judiciary don't understand that. We say, okay, we want supportive decision making, but what it will look like what do we want? Do we just want lift or some accessible physical infrastructure, or we are saying something else which is actually assistance to being part of the procedures of the court? So I think that is where ICJ is supporting in terms of building the rules with the judiciary. And apart from that, we are also publishing case laws that includes rights of, like, there could be good laws and good cases and bad cases. Bad cases in terms of these are not what we want and these are not compliance with international law. So we are compiling that, so that are really helpful to the lawyers and activists. And together with that, we are also engaging with the young lawyers to train them on strategic litigation. Stephen is already, like saying, oh yeah, this is the area, where we could work together with TCI. So we are training young lawyers. We are starting from economic, social, cultural rights, and we're moving towards legal capacity. See, I should be honest, if we go and, there are young set of lawyers and start talking about legal capacity, deinstitutionalization, they're not going to understand it. They're going to reject it, because our society is in a way that legal capacity is taken together with mental capacity, and they're going to say, no, I don't think this is correct. So first we're starting with ESCR, CRPD, so that they understand the disability rights, and themselves they will be advocate and take forward the cases. And for this, we have also started including lawyers who have disability themselves, so that they can be self-advocate and take their cases to the court. So we are engaging this way. I already have a chat, so I still have 2 minutes, okay? Having said this, I think if there would be a very hardcore Marxist in this room, that person would have said, okay, you talk about superstructure, then what about base? Like, you will need money, you will need funds to continue with this kind of activities. And yeah, I mean, we will need fund, but what, as someone working on this area, I believe is, it's not that we need very dedicated disability only project, we can start incorporating other projects from disability angles. For example, in ICJ, especially in Nepal, for a long time, we have been working on transitional justice, and there are victims of different kinds. So as we started working on disability rights, now we have started incorporating accountability angle together with victims who have been, disabled during the armed conflict. So this is how we can, incorporate disability rights work together with what we are doing. So ICJ in Nepal, we had been working on right to education. So if we include, like now we want to expand it to inclusive education, and when we're training the lawyers, we're saying, can you do research on what is the situation of inclusive education, or whether the syllabus are accommodative of needs of children who have intellectual disability. And now the young lawyers are coming, and they already have an interest on challenging the laws and policies that are not accommodative. So what I feel is, you don't need to have dedicated disability related projects only to continue what we are advocating for. Rather, we can make our programs accommodative of needs, so that we for 2 years we run this project and then there is no sustainability. So that's what we think. And having said that, there is a hashtag what we want. There is a hashtag of this event, we say what we want. So I think what we need, so human rights approach to disability, that is the important thing that we need, not taking it as a welfare approach, and engaging together with persons with disability. For a person like me, who is very new to this environment, or someone who is willing to learn, I think that person we should have a collaborative approach in terms of what TCI says, cross-disability approach. An important thing when we engage with government, in terms of inclusion, I think transition from current situation of deinstitutionalization to move forward towards deinstitutionalization is equally important. With that, I would like to thank you all, and also like to say that this declaration is officially launched. You have been talking about Bali Declaration, you have been talking about Adidas Declaration. I think now there is new declaration that you will probably like to cite. It's Kathmandu Declaration, access to Justice for Persons with Disability 2024. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Congratulations to the team at ICJ and also TCI for the incredible work on access to justice for persons with disabilities in Nepal. It's a really exciting project, a really exciting model of how to promote legal activism and legal advocacy to promote systemic reforms. And the truth of the matter is, I think internationally, the number of legal practitioners that are familiar with this area of work is shrinkingly small. I have to be honest with you that we probably know many of them in this room, just in this room, and we need to be building those new lawyers of the future and taking those cases and demanding rights in the courts. And I would have no doubt in my mind that Karuna would be a very powerful advocate in those courts for us. So thank you so much, and to the work of the ICJ. So we're going to now move to our third speaker, and I'm delighted to have here Hanbyul Choi from the Korean Disability Forum. Actually, she's just hot-footed it from Budapest, our headquarters, where she was joining our team and briefing us on the work of KDF. Hanbyul, you work for KDF, which is a cross-disability organization. You've been active in the field of deinstitutionalization. So what do you think cross-disability movements can do to support the rights of people with psychosocial disabilities? What's needed also in the Asian region more widely? So, Hanbyul, thank you.
Thank you. Hello, very good afternoon, everyone. I'm Hanbyul Choi from the Korean Disability Forum, which is located in the South Korea, of course. And I have to be very short because most of my prepared words are already mentioned in the previous presentations and our great colleagues from the TCI. So I will be very quick and very short. So I have to say that I have to start with the guidelines on the deinstitutionalization, including emergencies from the UNCRPD committee 2 years ago, which made us to understand and recognize that, deinstitutionalization is not only our national task, but it is a very international one, and the international community and the UNCRPD committee is seeing this problem quite seriously. And this is our top priority goal to achieve. So it was really great to see that also the guidelines, as you all know, that the guidelines were made by us, by persons with disabilities and their families and the caregivers, not by the experts. So it was really great to see that we have each other to make the guidelines, and it was really great tool to fight with. So, and due to the the guidelines, we also could see that deinstitutionalization is not only an issue of some persons with disabilities, for example, like persons with intellectual disabilities or persons with psychosocial disabilities, but we can say that that institutionalization is a concept of excluding the persons who are abnormal. Like the society always institutionalized those groups considered as abnormal or very costly, very expensive to care with. So, before, or even sometimes still are, the persons with physical disabilities, or women and girls with or without disabilities, or elderly people, older people, or LGBTQI groups still are at risk of institutionalization. They were and still are. So it's not only problem of persons with psychosocial disabilities or intellectual disabilities, but it's a problem for us, to all. Even, and I can see that, congratulations to the TCI women, and I can see deinstitutionalization is quite related to the feminism issue too. Because not only the women and girls are at high risk of being abused in institutions, but also in the community, still our most caregivers are women in many societies. And I, as an Asian woman, I can also see lots of my sisters are controlled by their families or by the patriarchy society. And I have to say that this is also a form of institutionalization, because you have no autonomy over your life and you have no control over your life. And we have to say this is an institutionalization, isn't it? So it is definitely a problem for all, everyone, including me. So that's why all the cross-disability organizations and also the caregiver organizations and feminist organizations, we have to work with them, and we have to make solidarity with all these organizations, because it is not only about the buildings, it is about what is called in the guidelines, the what was it, it was not that, revolution or reverse to the reverse of the unjust practice of the society. So yeah, that's why, sorry, I started, sorry, I will wrap up right now. So what we should do is that we have to broaden our solidarity with other groups, not only DPOs, but also other labor unions or what is it, other legal, for example, organizations. And at Asian region, thankfully, and thanks to TCI, and they are also the member of the Asian Coalition on Deinstitutionalization, which the Korean Disability Forum is also a member, and lots of, I can see, lots of our member organizations here. So please join to the Asian Coalition on Deinstitutionalization, and we can learn from each other, and we can assess each country's task, what we should do together. So it can be a research, or it can be a collective activism. Like we can send letters to the embassies of each countries when you have our colleagues have some problems in their own countries. And yeah, based on these collective actions and our constant dialogues, we can make a stable coalition in our region to end the institutionalization in our region, not only in our countries. So thank you. It was all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Hanbyul. I always am inspired by the work of KDF to create and support coalitions and expand partnerships. And even for Validity, my organization sitting in Budapest, we have learned so much, I think, from your work and your tireless and relentless efforts, I think, to build coalitions, particularly around the issue of deinstitutionalization. So I think it's a really good example of how cross-disability OPDs can prioritize issues that do have a distinct impact for people with psychosocial disabilities as well, and I commend you for it. Funny story, when South Korea was being reviewed at the CRPD committee a couple of years ago, I think it was, Hanbyul invited me to come and say hi to her colleagues, and I thought I would come and say hi, and I just landed in my t-shirt and shorts, as some of you have seen me. That's how I normally am. She said to come and say hi, and I opened the door, and I think there was over 60 or 70 representatives of Korean OPDs who were there to collectively raise their voices, and I thought I was a little bit underdressed. So, but a wonderful example of getting organizations involved also directly in the advocacy at the highest levels and then taking it back to Korea afterwards. So thank you. So I promised at this point we would have an opportunity, a minute or two it's going to be, to take any comments or questions from the floor. So I'm going to just ask you to be very brief. There will be time over lunch. But if anyone would like to briefly come in with a comment or a question, please raise your hand and I'm happy to call you in. Okay, shall I just bring the mic? Hey.
Hello, good afternoon. I am Pangarasi Msongore from Tanzania, East Africa. I thank you very much, TCI, for organizing this very important meeting, especially to us in Tanzania, because we are facing a very big problem of approaching the government. Now at least we have had an idea of how to go about, especially the presentation from you, what is the name, please? Yes, we were. It's very, very, very difficult for us to know how to go about it, about institutionalization, because most of the government officials do not even want to understand it. Especially in Tanzania, for example, you are not allowed to enter the prison. You are not allowed to enter these psychiatric hospitals, especially to see your relative. There are a lot of restrictive measures. When you were speaking, I had the idea now on how to go about it, and I thank you all for giving us the clue of how now we can do. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we take one more short remark, if you may.
Good afternoon.
Oh, okay.
I'm also from Tanzania. I have the idea about this institutionalization. I have the idea that if a person is in a crisis, he should be hospitalized in inclusive wards, not separate wards. In inclusive wards, and the doctor should tell him that you are taking which medicines and what day you are going to go out from this institution, not to confine them and abandon them. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And one final remark.
Oh, thank you so much for excellent presentation. I have two concerns. One thing is deinstitutionalization has been very highlighted, very good. But the thing is, what are the process for deinstitutionalization? We need to have investment, like we need to work with families, local government. So like, for example, Human Rights Watch, like one thing is bringing people out from institution, and then how about resources and working with families, community, enabling, creating support system. Like I think there have not enough resources, like how your experience, and also validity and ICJ. Like also we like to work more like the legal capacity with the duty bearer. So we need to 365 days. We need to work, and so there are some tools, technique. How can we engage with you? 365 days, not just one event and two events. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Clearly there's lots to discuss. One of the points there I think is very interesting. It's about building inclusive services so that persons with psychosocial disabilities are not segregated. And I think that was really interesting. And also the need for us to mobilize resources. Where does that come from? And I think perhaps our next speaker, Dr. Samuel Kabwe, may touch on this with his experience. But of course, under the CRPD, we have a strong document to call for international development assistance for this purpose. So I think that's a crucial topic. And yes, absolutely, 365 days a year, maybe a couple of days off for the weekends, but we should definitely work as much as we can on these issues. So thank you so much. I'm going to now hand the floor. 30 seconds, is it? 30 seconds, you can.
Sorry,
Yeah.
just one thought on the resources. So I think that's really important because we can talk in a vacuum on ideal principles, but until it's practical and can be implemented, it doesn't work. And I'll give you an example from the UK. What's really interesting about the UK is when you talk about hospitals, it's funded nationally by the NHS, the National Health Service. And when people are in the community, it's funded by local authorities. So it means that when local authority budgets are cut, post-Brexit, different governments, they have an incentive to keep people who might need, any kind of chronic support in hospitals. And this benefits private, especially when governments are going private, which is the case of the UK, there's a lot of privatization. They are benefiting because one psychiatric bed can be £250,000. So it's really important to look at the financing, and I think for us a strong argument is the economic one, to say it is cheaper to have community-based services that are inclusive and that support people in their homes in a comprehensive way than to lock them up. And I think that's something that as a movement we can really highlight.
Thank you very much, Kriti. And so we're going to now move to a couple. I've got a hand up there, but can we? You can ask the question, then we answer later, then we go to our next speaker. Here you are.
Sorry. Yeah. So, because there is this uproar on institutionalization and a lot of effort is being made on deinstitutionalization, what we are seeing in India is that a lot of people, they are being sent from the big and large institutions to smaller institutions, you know, and unfortunately these are being done by the civil sector, the NGOs and CBOs. So they are put into so when you say a community-based program, it might be a community home, you know, so it still retains the gatekeeping control mechanisms. It has everything about an institution except that they are not big and large. So the private practitioners, the NGO sector, in the name of, say, sheltered workshops or rehabilitation centers, daycare centers. So my question is to everybody who's working on deinstitutionalization: is there a way to capture this data and also to highlight that you know, deinstitutionalization is actually leading to the creation of more smaller institutions?
Thank you so much. And certainly we've seen this phenomenon in Europe. Validity has been monitoring this very closely. So it's absolutely true. The misuse of human rights language and disability rights language is a problem here. Labeling services that are still institutional as community-based is a real phenomenon. And I agree very much with the question. I now have the pleasure to hand the floor to Dr. Samuel Kabwe, member of the CRPD committee, who will speak from his experiences and expertise. And Samuel, we've been asked, how can we strengthen the voices of persons with psychosocial disabilities when advocating for the DI guidelines? What steps do you think state parties and others should be taking? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, strengthening the voice of persons with psychosocial disability in implementing the institutionalization. And obviously, we need to look at what the government needs to do, what are we doing in the OPDs, what are the INGOs doing in this particular regard. Let me say that the institutionalization was responding mainly to the provisions of Article 19 of the Convention that provides for people to be able to live independently in the community and also to live with who they want, not to be subjected to live in any way that restricts their rights. And the committee came up with the idea of deinstitutionalization and went all around the whole, we had conferences in every region for people to give us their views of deinstitutionalization and the kinds of deinstitutionalization that are existing in different places. And that leads me to the answer to the question that has been raised. Any living restriction that is not of one's choice, whether in a small home or whether in where you have not chosen, that we still consider it deinstitutionalization, and they are not alternative to deinstitutionalization where large institutions are being dismantled to bring people with disabilities to small organizations, small groups, homes, and all that. So the committee is very clear on this, and as Alan here has said, this has been a phenomenon in Europe, and the committee is addressing this in all its dialogues with the countries that are practicing this kind of institutionalization. Now, the institutionalization guidelines may need to be seen in the light of quite a number of other articles in the convention, because if you look at them alone, you may find that you will be in a narrow way looking at only people being removed from institutions into other places. The major reason for a lot of deinstitutionalization is people who are denied their legal capacity. And legal capacity has been a very key issue in implementing of the convention because it touches also on nearly all the other articles of the convention. And this is why when the committee listened to a number of countries that were giving their views on the implementation of Article 12 on the legal capacity, they came up with what is called a general comment number 1. And the general comment number 1 tries to elaborate what legal capacity means. It's not mental capacity. It's capacity to hold rights and capacity to act on those rights. When it comes to mental capacity, this is where we are talking of supported decision making. And supported decision making, even today, we have people who have lived in the institutions, and when you ask them, they don't know any other way. They only know that that's the place to live. They want to live with those people they have lived with all this while. They don't know what they are missing by being outside there. So when we talk of legal capacity, it touches on equality and discrimination. It will touch on liberty of persons. It will touch on access to justice that has just been mentioned here. And it will touch even to the integrity of the person. Torture, abuse, and all that. Because once your legal capacity is taken away, then people decide what to do with you. So when we come to the issue of how do we raise the voice of persons with psychosocial disability in addressing this question of the institutionalization, and here we are in a situation where that is our subject, the people with psychosocial disability. Where are they institutionalized? Mainly you find them in psychiatric institutions. You find them condemned in psychiatric institutions, sometimes for minor offenses for which they would have been maybe jailed for 3 months, but they are confined in these institutions for ages. In some of the countries, like in my country, at the pressure of the president. And when does the president think about a person with a psychosocial disability who is somewhere confined? Rarely will that happen. So you can be there forever. These are some of the issues that we need to understand. And for us to raise our voice, TCI has been a very, very good instrument and a good example of how we need to raise our voice on issues of deinstitutionalization. Because of TCI, the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities has been in every way addressing the issues of people with psychosocial disability. Not only on issues of deinstitutionalization, but on all these other issues that we have talked about, discrimination, the whole question of confinement, the whole question of coerced treatment, the whole question of being chemically or mechanically restrained. These are issues that have come to bear because of the work of the interaction of the committee with organizations like TCI. And that gives us an example of what we need to do in our various places where we come from. The whole question of participation of persons with disabilities in their own affairs and in the affairs of the country is very well embedded in the convention. And you find that in Article 4.3, we as organizations are expected to participate in all matters of the society. And that gives us a very open credibility for us to form ourselves into organizations that can raise their voice and that can be listened because they are coming in as organizations. So the whole question of the role of organizations or persons with disabilities, you find it embedded, as I said, in the obligations of the state, as well as in the implementation of the convention itself. So if we are going to implement all these issues of legal capacity, these issues of access to justice, these issues of liberty, issues of torture, we need to form ourselves in a strong organization because we are not able as individuals to speak to the states. It's not possible. So for us to raise our voices, we need to strengthen our organizations. And I know quite often organizations that deal with the persons with psychosocial disability have sometimes been underlooked and sometimes led by a specific individual, and when those individuals are not there, the organization is seen to really die. We are talking of the need for resilience in as far as OPDs are concerned, because they are the only ones who can speak about themselves, about people with psychosocial disabilities. The other area that is of concern is this area of awareness. Awareness is partly, largely done by organizations of persons with disabilities. And if we don't have organizations like TCI and others affiliated to it to do this kind of awareness, you'll find that very little will be achieved in terms of awareness. What are the countries supposed to do? In the Article 4 of the obligations, the countries are obligated to reform laws that relate to persons with disabilities. And one of the laws that has been very difficult to really work on in many of the countries, as we have observed in our work in the convention, is the mental health law in many places. Even where these laws are reformed, you find still there is a clause that is discriminatory. It's only now in one country, actually in Mexico, where specific recognition of legal capacity has been put into law. And putting things into law is also not adequate. It's not enough. The law itself is not enough. A lot needs to be done to implement that law. So the government have the responsibility to implement the laws. The government has the responsibility to reform all laws that are discriminatory, all laws, especially in our context today, all laws that lead to any form of institutionalization. And the mental health laws are some of those laws in many of the countries. And it is again our role as organizations or persons with disabilities to ensure that we raise issues on these laws that are discriminatory. The other issue I would like to say is that in the GDS commitment of that was in Norway, a lot of commitments were made, and Kenya, for instance, our country made a commitment to strengthen the organizations of persons with disabilities. people with psychosocial disabilities will need to take advantage of this and ensure that their organizations get recognized. Their organizations get to play their role. Their organizations get to be understood, because quite often people with psychosocial disabilities are put aside as if their views are not very important, they are not credible, and that kind of thing. Today we have been told here about cross-disability organization working closely with other organizations that are dealing with disability. Quite often you find in our countries we have federations, and these federations have a voice with the government. Some of them are exclusive and they don't give room to people with psychosocial disability. But if people with psychosocial disabilities have their own organization, they should be able to join this organization, and so that their voice is strengthened. I'm told I have one more minute.
Apologies.
Their voice is strengthened through other organizations. We have had a lot of interaction with international NGOs, and the international NGOs are important because they have a wider view of issues, and our cooperation with international organizations is part of that international cooperation, which we need to build strongly as organizations of people with psychosocial disability. This will help us to interact with others. It will help us to widen our horizon, and quite often it will also help us with the resources to do our advocacy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kawae. I'm terribly sorry to rush you. I got a message during this that people are getting hungry, lunch is calling, but I think you made some incredibly important points here, and you've also touched on one which I know that our next speaker, Dorothy Gould, will touch on, about this issue around mental health legislation specifically, and building coalitions around that. And I know, Dorothy, you're going to speak to us about your experiences from the UK. Is it enough just to amend the Mental Health Act in the UK, or is there more for us to do? And you have about 10 minutes, if that's okay, so that we don't miss lunchtime, I've been told. So there we are.
Because I'm aware people must be getting quite hungry now. But just to say, yes, I'm someone with a psychosocial disability from England. I founded a group called Liberation, which is led by people with psychosocial disabilities. We're based in England, but we also make links with the rest of the UK, and of course internationally. I completely agree with the point about international co-work is absolutely vital. And I'm going to be talking about the priorities Liberation has for advocacy and for changes in the UK's law and policies. And it's quite complicated in the UK. Each part of the UK has got different laws, and sometimes they overlap and sometimes they don't. So I'm going to talk especially about England, but with some reference to the rest of the UK as well. And particularly in Liberation, we're advocating for law and policy which is compliant with the CRPD. And I need to say absolutely bluntly, there is no law in the UK at the moment that is fully compliant. The government uses the European Convention on Human Rights as the basis for its legal framework and draws on this to justify an approach to people with psychosocial disabilities that remains highly discriminatory, because the European Convention allows people of unsound mind, in quotes, to be detained on a disability basis. The UK's got both mental health and mental capacity legislation, and both are based on a discriminatory white Western psychiatric model. and in complete breach of our rights under the CLPD, both authorise disability-based detention and forced treatment. And this has been alluded to over and over again, but in the UK as well, there's horrifying evidence that's finally coming to light of the sheer level of abuse that is going on in psychiatric hospitals and the horrifying level of deaths. But picking up the point about whether improvement is enough, what we've found at Liberation is that when the government is looking at reform, it continues to draw on this same white Western psychiatric model. And I'm going to illustrate this from a bill that's been introduced into the UK Parliament just actually in the last 10 days. It's a mental health bill, and this one covers England and to a large extent Wales. It remains highly discriminatory. It's based on the idea that existing mental health law just needs improving, and so we should have better rights, but not full rights. The bill fails to bring a complete end to disability-based detention and forced treatment. In the bill, these continue to be described as fully justified on the myth that is so embedded that we can be a particular risk to ourselves and others. That's still very widespread in the UK, despite all the contrary evidence. The bill falls well short of any adequate focus on intersectional issues, and its material about community resources, the sort that would enable us to live independently in the community, is also very weak. And just this week as well, I was reading the government's analysis of how this new bill fits with the European Convention. I think some of what it says actually about that is somewhat problematic, but in one paragraph at the end of that analysis, it switches to a comment on the CRPD, and it says that in the government's judgment, the bill I've just described is compliant with the CRPD. I mean, it sort of makes you laugh, doesn't it? I mean, I think, unfortunately, what they're going on is in the UK, there's quite a dominant view that the Convention doesn't really call for an end to disability-based detention. That's only the committee's view. So, tempting to say that the committee has sort of distorted the Convention. I have to say that the fact that this new bill went to Parliament was not unexpected, and needless to say, Liberation was not officially informed until the day after. And the difficulty in the UK is, and this is where, yes, the UK is very backward, mental health professionals, non-OPD mental health organisations, even some OPDs have been calling strongly for backing to this bill. And the media is also pretty supportive of it. But because we've been campaigning so hard from Liberation, including contributing to reviews and inquiries from the CRPD committee, you know, it really has been devastating news for us. And the other thing is that, you know, I think people here will know very clearly, the UK government has persistently tried and is still trying to say that this is the kind of legislation that should be coming in across the world, and that's just done so much damage. You know, it's just a continuing form of colonialism. The other thing we're doing at Liberation is to campaign strongly for a community inclusion approach based on the CRPD and also on the deinstitutionalisation guidelines in General Comment 5. But there are major obstacles there as well. In 2015, the government was the subject of a special inquiry into its implementation of Article 19 on independent living, Article 27 on work and employment, and Article 28 on an adequate standard of living and social protection. And again, to the very difficult news on that, but not a shock to any of those with psychosocial disabilities, the CRPD committee concluded that there's reliable of grave or systematic violations of the rights of persons with disabilities, and that in a country which is pretty well resourced. The situation hasn't improved since then, as many of us know from very direct personal experience. This year there was a follow-up to that special inquiry, and the committee concluded, absolutely rightly, that no significant progress has been made since 2015, and that in some cases there's been regression. Since that report came out, which was in the spring, there have been national elections, and we've now got a new government. But this government also is failing to put any meaningful focus on the CRPD committee conclusions and strong recommendations for fundamental change, the ones again reiterated very, very strongly in the special inquiry report this spring. A positive liberation is that pan-disability OPDs are campaigning strongly for major change, but their particular focus tends to be somewhat one-sided. It tends to be on independent living and community involvement for people with disabilities who are already in the community, and not to address adequately the need to end all forms of institutionalisation, whether it's, in a psychiatric hospital, whether it's in a residential home, whether that home is small, whether it's large. That is not getting, nearly adequate focus. So again, a lot of the work of liberation has been trying to say, look, both these are equally important. You can't really have one without the other. And we really need a voice on institutionalisation. So today, the emphasis on work across pan-disability organisations as well is very, very welcome. We're trying to do a lot of liaison about that in the UK. So key recommendations from Liberation would be recognise the huge damage that mental health and mental capacity laws have caused. It's been really, really concerning where it still seems like in some places the UK is still seen as a leader, we're not. Avoid falling into the trap that laws, mental health law or mental capacity law, can just be improved. There's no place for law that's improved but just still gives us half rights. They're still rooted in discrimination. And recognise that if there's to be genuine community inclusion for people with psychosocial disabilities, there needs to be an equal focus both on ending detention in psychiatric and other institutions and forced treatment, and on transformation in the community. And what we need is law and implementation measures which comply fully with the CRPD in relation to this, and yes, which are actually implemented. It's no good having laws if, then very little notice was taken of them. So I guess I want to be very frank about the UK, but also to share why we feel so strongly that there's got to be fundamental and radical change.
Thank you so much, Dorothy, for your insights. And as a fellow Brit, I would have to agree with you. Let's not follow that British model. We have run way over time, I'm sorry to say, but it was impossible for me to not listen to these important contributions, and I hope it has also been very beneficial to everyone here. I'm afraid we don't have time for a second round of questions now, because I've been told the food is going to be removed if we don't go and get it. But I think we can have conversations over lunch, and before the next session. So thank you to all of the panelists. Thank you to all of you for being very patient with us, and congratulations on your work here today and our collaborations going forward. Thank you very much. Thank you.